Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Today, I have something special to share with you, so get ready, because this is going to be worth it.
The letter that Pontius Pilate wrote to the Roman Emperor Tiberius about Jesus contains impressive details about Jesus' appearance that do not even appear in the Gospels. In this letter, he also speaks about the miracles of Jesus, his trial, crucifixion, and believe it or not, his resurrection. But what exactly does this letter say? What could Pilate have said to the emperor about the resurrection of the Son of God and about his physical appearance? Pilate begins the letter to Tiberius Caesar, the emperor, saying, "Greetings, Majesty. The recent events in my province have been so extraordinary that I feel the need to report everything in detail, for I believe that these events may, in the future, influence the destiny of our nation. It seems that lately, all the gods have turned away from us. I am almost ready to say that it was a cursed day when I took the place of Valerius in the government of Judea. Since then, my life has been full of worries and anguish. When I arrived in Jerusalem, I took possession of the Praetorium and organized a grand banquet. I invited a tetrarch from Galilee, the high priest, and his officials, but at the appointed time, no one appeared. I regarded this as a disrespect to my authority and to the Roman government. Days later, the high priest came to visit me with a serious and deceitful air. He claimed that his religion did not allow him to sit at the table with Romans, but his expression revealed the falsity of his words. Although I accepted his excuse, it was clear to me that he and his followers were against the Romans. I advised the Romans to be wary of the high priests of this land, for they would not hesitate to betray even their own mothers for power and wealth. Of the conquered cities, Jerusalem is the most difficult to control. The population is so rebellious that I live in constant fear of an uprising. I have few soldiers, only 1 centurion and 100 men under my command. I asked for reinforcements from the governor of Syria, but he told me he barely had enough soldiers to defend his own province. Our thirst for expansion seems to be beyond our capacity to defend what we have conquered. I fear this may lead to the downfall of our government. I have kept myself distant from the people, fearing that the priests might influence the rebels. Yet I have tried to understand the mentality and actions of this people. Among the many rumors I heard, one in particular caught my attention. They spoke of a young man in Galilee who preached a new doctrine in the name of a God who had sent him. At first, I thought he might be trying to incite the people against us, but I soon realized this was not the case. Jesus of Nazareth appeared to be more a friend of the Romans than of the Jews. One time, as I passed through the square, I saw a large crowd gathered around a young man leaning against a tree, speaking calmly. I learned that it was Jesus, which did not surprise me, given the difference between him and those who listened to him. I did not want to interrupt him with my presence and continued on my way, but I asked my secretary to mingle with the crowd to hear what he was saying. My secretary, Manios, is the grandson of an ancient conspirator who waited for Catiline in Etruria for many years. He knows Hebrew well, is loyal to me, and has my complete trust. When Manios returned to the Praetorium, he reported what Jesus had said. I have never encountered in the works of philosophers anything that compares to the wise words of Jesus. One of the many Jewish rebels asked Jesus if it was right to pay taxes to Caesar. He replied, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." It was this wisdom that made me grant freedom to the Nazarene, even having the power to arrest or exile him. Jesus was not an agitator nor a rebel. He offered me his protection, perhaps without realizing it. Jesus had the freedom to act, speak, gather with the people, choose his disciples, and teach without being hindered by any command of mine. If someday the religion of our ancestors is replaced by Jesus's, it will be this tolerance that leads to the fall of Rome, while I, as an unfortunate instrument, will have been part of what the Jews call providence and we call fate. This freedom I gave Jesus disturbed the wealthier and more powerful Jews. Jesus was harsh with them, and that was a reason for me to let him be free. To the scribes and Pharisees, he said, "You are like snakes. You appear beautiful on the outside, but inside you are full of death." On other occasions, he criticized local traditions, saying that humility was more valuable in the eyes of God than any social status. Almost every day, I received complaints in the praetorium about the audacity of Jesus. They warned me that something bad could happen to him and that Jerusalem had a history of stoning those who claimed to be prophets. An appeal to Caesar was being prepared, but the Senate approved my actions and promised reinforcements after the Persian War, for I did not have enough troops to contain a revolt. I then decided to take a step to restore peace to the city without having to lower myself. I wrote to Jesus, asking him to come to the praetorium for a conversation. He came. You know, being of Spanish and Roman blood, I am not one to fear or become easily emotional. But when Jesus appeared, I was on my balcony and felt as though my feet were glued to the marble floor. I trembled all over like someone guilty, while the Nazarene remained calm, with an air of serenity that resembled pure innocence. When he approached, he paused and with a subtle gesture seemed to say, "I am here," without needing to utter a word. For a long time, I was captivated and impressed by that man, a type our artists never imagined when creating forms and figures of gods and heroes. There was nothing repulsive about him, yet I felt too old and fragile to approach. I finally spoke. "Jesus of Nazareth, in the last 3 years, I have granted you total freedom of expression, and I do not regret it. Your words are practical and wise. I do not know if you have read Socrates or Plato, but I recognize that the simplicity and majesty of your discourse elevate you far above these philosophers. The emperor is aware of this, and as his representative here, I am pleased to have granted you this freedom that you so deserve. I must tell you that your words have attracted powerful and deluded enemies. Socrates also had enemies and ended up being a victim of them. Your enemies are even more incensed against you for the harshness of your words and against me for allowing you to speak freely. Some even accuse me of conspiring with you to undermine what little civil power Rome still allows the Hebrews. My recommendation, and not an order, is that you be more careful and moderate in your speeches from now on, considering that your enemies may use pride to incite the ignorant people against you, forcing me to act according to the law." Jesus replied calmly, "Ruler of the earth, your words do not come from true wisdom. Ask the mountain Torah to stop in the valley. It will say that it obeys the laws of nature and the Creator God. Only He knows where the waters flow. I tell you the truth, before the rose of Sharon blooms, the blood of the just will be shed." "Your blood will not be shed," I responded, moved. "I regard you as more valuable for your wisdom than all those rebellious Pharisees who abuse the freedom that the Romans have granted them. They conspire against Caesar and speak ill of him, making the people believe that he is a tyrant who wants to destroy them. These ungrateful ones do not realize that sometimes the wolf dresses in sheep's clothing to fulfill their evil purposes. I shall protect you against them. My praetorium will be a sacred refuge for you both day and night." Jesus, carefree, shook his head, and with a calm and serene smile said, "When the moment comes, there will be no refuge for the Son of Man, neither on earth nor beneath it. True refuge is in the heavens, pointing above. What was written by the prophets will be fulfilled. Wary, I replied, "You are forcing me to turn my request into an order. The security of this province under my responsibility requires this. You need to moderate your speeches. Do not disrespect this order, for you know the consequences." "May happiness accompany you, O Prince of the Earth," Jesus replied. "I did not come into the world to bring unrest, but rather peace, love, and charity. I was born on the same day that Augustus Caesar brought peace to the Roman Empire. The persecutions do not come from me, but I expect to face them from others in obedience to the will of my Father, who has shown me the path to follow." Then he said, "Control your words. It is not within your power to keep the victim on the altar of expiation." As he said this, he faded away like a luminous shadow behind the curtains of the horizon, which brought me great relief, for his presence imposed a burden upon me that I could not bear. Herod, who governed at the time and was already aging, united with the enemies of Jesus to execute his revenge. If it had only been up to Herod, he would have ordered Jesus' death immediately. But despite the pride in his royal position, he hesitated to do anything that could undermine his influence with the Senate. Or perhaps just like me, he also feared Jesus, but it would not be fitting for a Roman official to admit to fearing a Jew. Herod came to visit me in the Praetorium, and as he rose to leave after an insignificant conversation, he asked me what I thought about the Nazarene. I told him that Jesus seemed to me to be one of the great philosophers that a great nation sometimes produces, and that his teachings had nothing to do with political issues, and that Rome had decided to let him speak freely because his actions did not justify any restriction. Herod gave me a sardonic smile, and with an ironic bow, said goodbye. The great Jewish feast of Passover was approaching, and there was an intention to take advantage of the popular fervor that always took hold of the city. Jerusalem was crowded with a noisy multitude crying for the death of Jesus. My informants told me that the temple treasury had been used to bribe the people. The danger was imminent, and a Roman centurion was publicly disrespected. I wrote to the procurator of Syria asking for reinforcements, 100 infantry soldiers and 100 cavalry soldiers, but he refused. I found myself isolated with a small group of veterans in a city hostile enough to contain a revolt, and with no alternative but to tolerate the crowds shouting incessantly, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" At that moment, 3 great factions united against Jesus: the Herodians, the Sadducees, and the Pharisees. The ambiguous position of the Herodians and Sadducees seemed to have 2 motivations. They hated Jesus, and at the same time, they were tired of Roman domination. They had never forgiven me for entering the holy city with banners that displayed the image of the Roman emperor, even though I had made a serious mistake at that occasion. For them, that sacrilege still seemed unforgivable. Another conflict was growing among them. I had suggested using part of the temple treasury to finance public works, and this proposal was seen by the Pharisees, who were already enemies of Jesus, as something unacceptable. They cared little for the government and held resentment for the harsh criticisms the Nazarene had directed at them over the 3 years everywhere he went. In addition to these groups, I still had to deal with the disorderly and irresponsible population, always ready to unite in a revolt and take advantage of the ensuing chaos. In light of this, Jesus was brought to the high priest and condemned to death. It was at this moment that Caiaphas, the high priest, took an apparent submissive stance by sending Jesus to me to finalize the condemnation and ensure his execution. I replied that as Jesus was from Galilee, the case should be tried by Herod, and I ordered that he be sent there. Herod, for his part, displaying false humility and declaring deference to the representative of Caesar, returned Jesus to me, leaving the responsibility in my hands. Soon, my palace transformed into a fortress, surrounded by a growing number of discontented. Jerusalem was invaded by crowds descending from the mountains of Nazareth. It seemed that all of Judea was gathering in the city. A seer, who claimed to foresee the future, threw herself at my feet, crying, and warned me, "Beware, do not touch that man, for he is holy." Last night, I saw him in a vision, walking on the waters, flying on wings of wind. He spoke to the storm and to the fish of the lake, and they all obeyed him. I saw the river on Mount Caterina running with blood, the statues of Caesar shedding tears, and the morning sun appearing like a virgin in mourning. If you do not heed your wife's pleas, a great evil awaits you. Fear the curse of the Roman Senate. Fear the thrones of Caesar. At that moment, the marble steps trembled under the weight of the crowd. When they brought Jesus back to me, I went to the courts of justice, surrounded by my guard, and firmly asked the crowd what they wanted. They answered that they wanted Jesus' death. "What is his crime?" I asked. He blasphemed, prophesied the destruction of the temple, and declared himself the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of the Jews, they answered. I replied that Roman justice does not condemn anyone to death for such accusations, but the cries of crucify him, echoed through the maddened crowd, shaking the palace walls. Among everyone, the only one who seemed calm was Jesus. After several failed attempts to protect him from the wrath of his enemies, I adopted a measure that seemed the only one capable of saving his life. I suggested, as was the custom at that time, to free a prisoner during the festivities, to release Jesus and let him go. However, the people insisted that Jesus be crucified. I attempted to argue, pointing out that their actions were inconsistent with their own laws. I explained that according to Jewish law, no judge could condemn a defendant without first fasting for an entire day, and that the sentence required the consent of the Sanhedrin and the signature of its president. In that tribunal, no criminal execution could occur on the same day as the sentence was given. The following day would be the day of execution, and the Sanhedrin should review the entire process. Moreover, their law required that a man be at the door of the tribunal holding a banner, while another mounted on a horse would announce the name of the condemned, the crime he committed, and the names of the witnesses, asking if there were anyone who could testify in his favor. The prisoner on his way to execution had the right to return up to 3 times to present new arguments in his defense. I insisted on these points in hopes of calming them, but the shouts of crucify him," continued. I then ordered that Jesus be flogged, thinking this would be enough, but it only intensified their hatred. I called for a basin and washed my hands before that furious crowd, affirming that in my judgment, Jesus of Nazareth had done nothing deserving of death. But my words were futile. Jesus' fate had already been sealed. I had seen the fury of crowds during civil unrest, but nothing compared to that day. It seemed that all the spirits from the depths of hell had gathered in Jerusalem. The crowd didn't walk. It was dragged and spun like a whirlwind, moving in furious waves from the gates of the Praetorium to Mount Zion, with shouts and screams that exceeded any turmoil I had witnessed in the Pannonian riots or at the Forum. The day gradually darkened like a winter twilight, reminiscent of what happened at the death of Julius Caesar. it was similarly the Ides of March. As the governor of a rebellious province, I was huddled in a corner of my basilica, watching the somber scene as the innocent Nazarene was led to execution. Everything around me was deserted. Jerusalem had emptied its inhabitants through the funeral gates that lead to Jamnia. An air of sadness and desolation hung in the atmosphere. My faith joined the cavalry, and the centurion tried to maintain order amidst the chaos. I was alone, and a weight in my heart warned me that what was happening there was more a drama of the gods than of men. The sounds of agony echoed from Golgotha, carried by the wind as if announcing a suffering never before felt by human ears. Black clouds gathered over the temple and spread across the city, covering it like a dark veil, with visible signs both in the heavens and on earth. They say that Dionysius the Patriarch exclaimed, "Either the Creator is suffering or the universe is falling apart." While these terrible phenomena occurred, a frightening earthquake shook Lower Egypt, filling everyone with dread and nearly scaring the superstitious Jews to death. Balthazar, an old erudite Jew from Antioch and a close friend of the Nazarene, was found dead after the earthquake. Whether his death was caused by fright or sorrow, no one knows. Close to the first hour of the night, I involved myself in my duties and descended into the city towards the gates of Golgotha. The sacrifice had been consummated. The crowd was returning home, still agitated, but with a somber air of regret for what they had witnessed. I also saw my small Roman court passing silently and dejected. The standard-bearer had draped his standard with the eagle as a sign of mourning. I heard some Jewish soldiers murmur strange words that I did not understand, while others spoke of miracles similar to those the Romans had always associated with their gods. At times, groups of men and women would stop and look back at Mount Calvary as if they were waiting for a new sign. I returned to the Praetorium with a heavy heart, climbing stairs still stained with the blood of the Nazarene. I noticed an elderly man on his knees in a supplicating posture, surrounded by Romans who were weeping. He threw himself at my feet and sobbed bitterly. Seeing an old man cry is always painful, and my heart, already burdened with sadness, became even more moved. We cried together, and it seemed that everyone there, both he and many in the crowd, were on the verge of tears. I had never seen anything like it. The people who had betrayed, sold, and shouted against him were gone like cowards. They told me that these men had raised their mouths with vinegar in reference to what Jesus had said about the resurrection and the separation of the dead. If that happened, it was there, before that huge crowd. "Father," I asked after managing to control myself, "who are you and what do you want?" "I am Joseph of Arimathea," he replied, "and I come to ask your permission to bury Jesus of Nazareth." I granted him the request and ordered that a few soldiers accompany the burial to ensure that the body was not desecrated. A few days later, the tomb was found empty, and the disciples began to proclaim that Jesus had risen, just as he had predicted. This caused even more commotion than his own death. I cannot say for certain what really happened, but I investigated this matter thoroughly. You can check for yourself and decide if I erred at any moment, as Herod alleges. Joseph used his own tomb to bury Jesus, but whether he knew or planned something regarding the resurrection, I cannot affirm. The day after the burial, a priest came to the Praetorium, concerned that the disciples might steal Jesus' body to make it seem that he had risen, as he had predicted and in which they firmly believed. I directed him to the captain of the guard, Marcos, ordering him to place Jewish soldiers around the tomb, however many it took. so that if anything occurred, the blame would fall on them and not on the Romans. When the news of the empty tomb spread, my anxiety increased. I sought Marcos, who reported to me that he had stationed his lieutenant Benam with 100 soldiers to guard the place. He informed me that Issam and his men were terrified by the events of that morning. I called Issam, who recounted to me the following events as faithfully as possible. He said that around the beginning of the fourth watch, a soft and beautiful light appeared over the tomb. At first, he thought that some women had come to embalm Jesus' body as was customary, but he couldn't understand how they would have passed by the guards. While pondering this, the entire place was illuminated, and he saw what appeared to be a crowd of the dead in their shrouds, all looking younger and full of joy, as the most beautiful, heavenly music he had ever heard echoed in the air. It seemed that the air was filled with voices praising God. Suddenly, the earth began to shake and sway in such a way that he felt weak, unable to stand, as if the ground was moving beneath his feet, and he completely lost consciousness, unaware of what happened next. I asked him what state he was in when he regained consciousness. He stated that he was lying on the ground with his face down. I questioned whether he might have confused the light with the dawn in the east. He responded that he initially thought so, but that it was still too dark, a short distance away, and he recalled that it was too early for the day to break. I asked if the dizziness could have been caused by getting up quickly, as that sometimes provokes such a sensation. He affirmed that it could not have been because he had not slept all night, since the punishment for sleeping on duty was death. He mentioned that he had allowed some of the soldiers to sleep at that moment and that some were still sleeping. I asked how long the scene lasted. He said he wasn't sure, but estimated it lasted almost an hour until it was covered by the light of day. I asked if he went to the sepulchre after regaining his senses, and he said no, as he was afraid. As soon as reinforcements arrived, everyone returned to the barracks. I inquired whether the priests had interrogated him, and he confirmed that they had, saying that the priests wanted him to assert that it was an earthquake and that the guards were asleep. They offered money for him to say that the disciples had come and stolen Jesus' body, but he did not see any disciple and did not know that the body was missing until he was told. I inquired about the personal opinion of the priests he spoke with. He said that some believed Jesus was not an ordinary man, that he was not a human like others, and that he was not the son of Mary, as was said, but rather a figure who had already been on earth before the days of Abraham and Lot, and in many other times and places. If the Jewish theory is correct, these conclusions seem to make sense, for they align with what we know about this man's life. It is widely recognized by both friends and enemies that Jesus appeared to have control over the elements. As a potter with clay in his hands, he turned water into wine, healed illnesses, brought the dead back to life, calmed storms, and even called fish to him with coins in their mouths. If he could do all these things and more, as witnessed by the Jews, and it was precisely by doing so that he awakened so much enmity, it is clear that he was not accused of crimes or violating laws, nor of harming anyone personally. These events are known by thousands, both friends and adversaries. I am inclined to think, as someone once said from the cross, truly, this was the Son of God. Pontius Pilate described Jesus as an impressive figure, different from all others. He would have mentioned that Jesus was a man of medium height, with a serene demeanor and a calm presence that caught the attention of everyone around him. His face was characterized by an expression of kindness and peace, radiating calm even in the most tense moments. Jesus always seemed to look compassionately at people, as if he deeply understood each one of them. The writings say that Jesus had long, soft hair falling over his shoulders in a harmonious manner. They were described as somewhat wavy and a light brown or even blonde color, which stood out among the people of the region. His eyes were one of his most striking features, described as deep and penetrating, with a hue that varied between light brown and blue, depending on who narrated. His eyes conveyed a sense of wisdom and kindness, yet at the same time, a firmness that seemed to understand everything about life and the human heart. Jesus' skin was described as fair with a soft texture, almost like that of someone who works outdoors, but maintaining a healthy and well-cared-for appearance. His face was considered handsome and symmetrical, with features that inspired trust and reverence. It was not merely an ordinary face, but one that conveyed authority without being imposing or threatening. He wore a full, well-groomed beard, which added a certain maturity and respect to his appearance. Jesus always dressed simply but dignified. His clothing was clean, even if modest, usually consisting of a long cloak and a tunic. He did not wear flashy accessories or jewelry, showing his detachment from material things. His appearance conveyed a message of humility and simplicity, even amid his imposing presence. He was someone who, without saying a word, managed to transmit a message of peace and welcome. Now, noble sovereign, this is the most faithful account of the facts that I can present regarding the case. I took care to report everything in detail so that you can fairly assess my conduct, for I know that many criticisms have been made against me in this matter. With promises of loyalty and respect to my sovereign, I remain your most obedient servant. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel. Now click on the video that is appearing on your screen to discover more mysteries like this.